So what exactly is narcissistic abuse? A lot of people have heard this phrase at this point in time, but even for those of us who are aware of it and who have dealt with these types of things, it can be really difficult and challenging to kind of, put narcissistic abuse into words to sort of describe or explain to somebody who doesn't have any experience with it. I mean, honestly, it's difficult to explain it even if you have experience with it. So, being somebody who has direct experience with narcissistic abuse, and who spent a considerable amount of time trying to understand it and heal from it and understand all the different behavior patterns and characteristics of the narcissist in my life, I was sort of able to narrow it down and really isolate the key sort of behavior patterns and characteristics of narcissists, as well as to try to explain why they're acting the way that they're acting. And so I thought I'd go ahead and make a little video on it and share that with you here. So narcissistic abuse, first and foremost, you got to understand, not to sound like a smart aleck or anything, it's abuse from a narcissist, right? So to understand narcissistic abuse a little more, you've got to understand a little bit about what a narcissist is, specifically someone who's a narcissistic personality disordered individual, right? In the mental health field, those who understand narcissistic abuse and personality disorder and, who've spent a lot of time in this area, generally say that although it's not every case, most of the time a narcissist is someone who has what's called a narcissistic wound within them, right? And basically, a narcissistic wound is basically just a form of really intense emotional and psychological trauma that, took place in their life. Usually, a lot of times they were abused by a narcissist in their life, and, that narcissist had narcissists in their life. It's sort of an intergenerational thing. Usually, not all the time, but usually. And so it's basically a narcissistic wound is like unresolved emotional and psychological trauma that the narcissist's brain sort of pushes back into their subconscious so they don't have to deal with it, right? So just picture it like a narcissistic wound is, it's just sort of a source of emotional and psychological trauma that's so painful that the narcissist pushes it back out of their awareness. So there is a degree of sort of dissociation going on with a narcissistic individual. And so whether or not they can look at that trauma or they can't is sort of up for debate still, I think, amongst the mental health field professionals as well. But the biggest issue with narcissists is that they just don't, or they won't, look at their own inner issues. And so what happens is, number one, they're sort of dissociated from themselves. Number two, they're still in emotional pain. Number three, their emotional needs are not being met, right? So they're sort of like starving emotionally. They're always sort of in a certain degree of inner pain. And so, they're angry because of that. They're sad. So, it's like a narcissistic wound. They're not resolving their emotional issues. And so instead of that, and because it's so suppressed in their subconscious, they project it outward onto the world around them. And usually this is done with what's called a scapegoat, so that they can really sort of take their unresolved issues out on one particular person. Usually someone who's safe, who's like behind closed doors, that, other people won't believe if they told other people how the narcissist is acting. So I boiled down what the narcissist's motives down to three primary characteristics, right? The first one is they need to do everything in their power to deflect their own attention as well as the attention of others away from their narcissistic wound, right? So it's like they don't want to be seen, they don't want to be heard, they don't want their narcissistic wound exposed. So they do everything in their power, all kinds of manipulative tactics to deflect people's attention and their own attention away from that narcissistic wound. The second is they need attention, right? And it's kind of sad from one point of view because they need their emotional needs to be met, right? But because they're not being met, they still need people's attention. But they do it, so they get it in a really unhealthy, backwards, twisted way, through basically manipulating people's focus and attention to be on them through all kinds of chaos and stuff. So it's not directly looking at them and their narcissistic wound, but they're still kind of getting everyone's attention. This is where it seems like everything's always about the narcissist, because it is. It's a really weird, sad state of emotional and psychological affairs, and that it's sort of like everything's about them and nothing's about them. And nothing's about them because they're not getting their emotional needs met in a healthy way. So it's kind of like a child, right? Just screaming and crying because they need attention, but they don't know how to go about getting it in a healthy and rational way. So they they do all kinds of antics and, cause all kinds of chaos and crises and all kinds of arguments just to try to get people's attention on them. And the third major characteristic is to get narcissistic supply, which is basically kind of like getting a rush from something. It's what they get on an emotional level from all the chaos that they cause, right? And this is sort of the substitute for not getting their emotional needs met in a healthy way, right? So they get this rush, right, this narcissistic supply from, again, all kinds of chaos, fighting, arguments, blaming people, baiting people. There's many different things they can do and do on a regular basis in order to get this. And we could go on talking about all these different things forever, which is honestly what this channel is about. But in this video, I really wanted to talk about what narcissistic abuse is, because when you take those three characteristics, they're three sort of subconscious objectives together, you can understand what narcissistic abuse is a little bit clearer, because you got someone whose emotional needs aren't being met. They've got a lot of inner pain, trauma, and rage and anger. They can't look within to get it. They need attention from others, and they're going to do everything in their power to get attention in an unhealthy way. And they usually end up, all these antics, right? Everything they do to get all this attention is abusive to the people around them, and usually specifically to the scapegoat in their life. There could be more than one, usually it's one, where basically they can really take out their anger and rage and unresolved pain out on one particular person. And it's really unbelievable levels of nonstop emotional and psychological abuse for a person who's dealing with narcissistic abuse. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of, or an idea of what it is, narcissistic abuse, and what it's like for someone to have to go through it. I hope that makes sense, and I hope it kind of clears things up so you can kind of understand what narcissistic abuse is a little bit better.